Mom! Mike! One day, when I got home from school, my mom and my brother Mike, who were supposed to be at home, were nowhere to be found. Even as evening came, they didn't return, and to make matters worse, my dad didn't come back from work either. I hesitated for a moment as my hand touched the fridge handle. Normally, I wouldn't even dare to go near the fridge, let alone touch it, because my mom would scold me about wasting electricity. Overwhelmed by hunger, I finally opened the door. Inside, there were only condiments like ketchup and mayonnaise. Desperate to satisfy my hunger, I grabbed the ketchup and squeezed it into my mouth, but I ended up coughing from the strong acidity and sweet spicy taste. I put my mouth directly under the faucet and gulped down tap water. It didn't feel like it filled my stomach at all. Then, I heard a noise from the direction of the entrance. Mom! Thinking everyone had come back, I ran to the entrance, but standing there was my grandmother Susan. Mary! Weren't you supposed to be in Germany? Both my grandmother and I were surprised and looked at each other. Dad, Mom, and Mike all left for Germany just a while ago. I thought for sure you had gone with them. A mix of surprise, sadness, and anger was evident in my grandmother's expression. This is just too much. With a determined nod, my grandmother said, Mary, from today on, you'll live at my house. She smiled kindly and hugged me. My grandmother's arms were very warm. My name is Mary, and I'm in my 20s. Currently, I live with my grandmother, who has been feeling weak in her legs. Going up and down the apartment elevator is hard, but I've never thought of assisting my grandmother as a burden. On the contrary, I feel a debt of gratitude towards her that I can never fully express. If it weren't for my grandmother, I don't know where I'd be right now. My family situation has been complicated since I was young. I struggled with learning words and was slower at reading and writing than other kids in elementary school, not just in English but in other subjects as well, making my grades some of the lowest. Both of my parents graduated from top national universities, and it seemed like they resented me for not being good at studies. Do Mom and Dad hate me? Mumbling to myself, I couldn't understand why my parents dislike me, and night after night, I would fall asleep crying. I have an older brother, Mike, who is 5 years older than me. Unlike me, Mike has always been quick to learn and has consistently achieved top-level results in school tests since he was young. He was even called a prodigy by our school and neighbors, and for our parents, Mike was a source of pride. My mother would always compare Mike and me, sighing and saying things like, "Because of you, our entire family feels embarrassed. Please, try to stay indoors as much as possible." She spoke in an unmistakably unpleasant manner. "I'm sorry, Mom." That was all I could ever manage to say in response. As test days approached, my mother would always kick me out of my room, claiming I'd disturb Mike, and place a cushion in the hallway for me. "You'll sleep here for the next few days," she'd say, but it was during the cold winter, and I shook my head, refusing. Seeing this, my father became furious. "Don't be selfish when you're so useless. Be grateful you're not kicked out of the house." And he yelled in agreement with his mother. At the time, I didn't know the word unfair, but I couldn't understand why I was the only one subjected to such treatment, and I was overwhelmed with frustration and tears. My mother's harassment of me escalated, and eventually, she'd make me kneel in the hallway and say, "Eat this," as she poured dressing on vegetable peels meant to be thrown away as organic waste, forcing me to eat them. Meanwhile, my family enjoyed warm soup and conversations in the heated dining room. "Hey, Ben. Mike topped his class again in the recent test." "It's nothing. Thanks for sending me to a top-level tutoring center so I can focus on my studies. I appreciate it. Don't get ahead of yourself." Being top of the local school means nothing if you lose to a rival. You need to aim higher. I understand. I'll continue to work hard and stay focused on my studies. After finishing the vegetable peels, I held the empty plate and said, "Mom, I'd like some warm soup too." My mother glared at me. "Why don't you drink from the river?" she retorted, and then the three of them burst into laughter. Hearing my family's exchanges, all I could do was sit in the hallway, hugging my knees, enduring the hunger and cold, waiting for dawn to break. In those times, there was one person who became my ally, my paternal grandmother. She used to live far away but moved into a nearby vacant house to start a handicraft class because her previous home was too small. When I returned home from school, she'd beckon me with a smile. "Welcome back. Did you have fun at school? I've prepared some snacks for you, come eat." As dusk began to fall and I watched my grandmother start to prepare dinner from behind. "Mary, you should be heading home soon. Isn't your mom waiting, preparing dinner for you?" She noticed my gaze and turned around to ask. I shook my head vigorously from side to side. "Mom won't make anything for me." "Then what do you usually eat?" "Vegetable peels, tap water." My grandmother rushed over and hugged me tightly. "From today on, you'll eat here." "Really? Is that okay?" "Of course. You're growing, Mary. You need to eat plenty and grow big and strong." "Thank you, Grandma." For the first time, I felt someone's warmth and couldn't stop my tears. From that day, I started sneaking over to my grandmother's house to eat, avoiding my family's eyes. Being able to have a warm meal and fill my stomach felt like a reward. Things that seem ordinary now were a joy for me back then. Students began flocking to my grandmother's house for the craft class she started. Neither my grandmother nor her students ever treated me as a nuisance, but I made sure to keep to a corner of the room and quietly draw so as not to disturb anyone. I feared nothing more than being disliked by my grandmother, for then I would have no place left at all. Somehow, drawing allowed me to forget the unpleasantness around me. One day, knowing my situation, my grandmother stormed to my parents' house and yelled, "What are you thinking? Not feeding her properly. Mary is your child too." My father just frowned in annoyance and locked himself in his room, leaving my mother to deal with it, who replied with a sigh, "Punishing bad grades is part of parenting. Don't interfere with our educational methods." They didn't listen at all. Worse yet, after my grandmother left, I was scolded severely by my parents. "Why did you tell Grandma such things? I came back from work tired and all you do is just cause trouble." "That's right. You're already useless. Don't make things harder for us." "I'm sorry." With a heavy heart, all I could do was apologize, pushing down the feelings of injustice. "From tomorrow, stop going to Grandma's. Your presence embarrasses us in the neighborhood," I was harshly told. Feeling dejected, I encountered Mike as I walked down the hallway, just as he came out of his room. "You've got it easy, always free to play." "I have to study because I'm capable, which makes my days busy and hard." Thinking it was a taunt, I didn't reply but glared back at him angrily. Then, one day, "A friend of mine works at an educational institution in Germany. I mentioned Mike to him, and he suggested we let Mike attend a university there." "Wow, university? But Mike is still in elementary school." "Don't worry. Regardless of age, those who are capable can aim for the top. With Mike's abilities, skipping grades is a certainty. Besides, it would be a waste to keep Mike in a low-level education through middle school and high school. It'd be like throwing tuition money down the drain." "That's true. For someone of Mike's capabilities, aiming higher is essential for his future." Understood. Let's plan to move as a family soon. Thank you for doing this for me. Dad, Mom. While overhearing the conversation about moving abroad, I was seized by anxiety. I can barely read and write English. How will I manage to communicate in German after moving to Germany? Won't I just be a burden to my family in Germany? I stopped Mike as he was about to return to his room. Mike, I'm scared of learning German. That's not something you need to worry about. Mike scoffed and locked himself in his room. I couldn't grasp the meaning behind Mike's words. Does it mean that even if I can't understand German, my parents and Mike will help me? Trying to think positively seemed futile given my family's treatment of me up to now. Then, one day after returning from school, I searched the house. Mom! Mike! But my mother and brother were nowhere to be found. Evening came, and not only did they not return, but my father didn't come back from work either. That day, something strange was said to me by my homeroom teacher at school. Will your dad and mom come to pick you up later? The teacher asked with a puzzled look, but I couldn't understand what she meant and was at a loss for words. What did that mean? Was it that my parents were going to take me somewhere? But no matter how long I waited, none of my family returned. Hesitating for a moment, my hand touched the fridge handle. Normally, I wouldn't even dare to go near the fridge, let alone touch it, because my mom would scold me about wasting electricity. Overwhelmed by hunger, I opened the door. Inside were only condiments like ketchup and mayonnaise. Desperate to satisfy my hunger, I grabbed the ketchup and squeezed it into my mouth, but coughed due to the intense acidity and sweet spicy taste. I put my mouth directly under the tap and gulped down water. It didn't feel like it filled my stomach at all. Then, I heard the door opening from the entrance. Mom! Hoping everyone had returned, I headed to the entrance, but standing there was my grandmother. Mary! Weren't you supposed to be in Germany? Both my grandmother and I were surprised and looked at each other. Dad, Mom, and Mike all left for Germany just now. I thought for sure you had gone with them. My grandmother's expression was a mix of surprise, sadness, and anger. This is just too much. With a determined nod, my grandmother said, Mary, from today on, you'll live at my house. She smiled kindly and held me in her arms. My grandmother's embrace was very warm. And so, I came to live with my grandmother. When I got home from school and said, I'm home, my grandmother would respond with a cheerful welcome back from inside the house. That was what I cherished the most. Sometimes, while I was sleeping, I would dream about my parents and brother leaving me behind and going far away. And when I woke up, I would find my pillow wet with tears. To me, who had forgotten how to smile after being abandoned by my family, my grandmother said, Those people are not your family. From now on, I am your family. Every night, she would hug my trembling body tightly. Thanks to her, I stopped having scary dreams. Teacher, I'm looking forward to today's lesson. My grandmother's craft class was popular, and many students came. On days when there was a class, I quietly drew in a corner of the room, careful not to be in the way. I really wanted to play more with my grandmother, but didn't feel it was my place to ask too much. If my grandmother grew tired of me, I would have no place to belong. I didn't want to lose a family again. After the class ended and the students had left, my grandmother, with a broad smile, said, Mary, thank you for waiting. Shall we have some ice cream together? She took out the ice cream she had bought from the freezer and handed it to me. Grandma, this is delicious. Of course, the ice cream itself was sweet and cold, but what I loved most was spending time eating it with my grandmother. Trying to extend these moments, I ate my ice cream slowly, until eventually, it melted and dropped to the floor. I'm sorry. Grandma! I thought she would hate me. I apologized reflexively, trembling. If it had been my mother next to me, I would have been punished by now. But my grandmother just laughed and didn't get angry. Instead, she gently patted my head. Don't be scared. Everyone makes mistakes. More importantly, Mary, keep smiling. I love your smiling face the most. After that, I gradually began to regain my smile. After dinner and a bath, when I was ready for bed, my grandmother would teach me to read and write almost every night. This letter is written like this. Now, you try. I tried to imitate the letters my grandmother wrote, but at first, they were crooked. Don't rush. With daily practice, you'll gradually get better. My grandmother's teaching method was very clear, and my fear of words gradually disappeared. After a few years, I had grown to be able to read and write enough for daily life. I got praised by the teacher for my book report. That's wonderful, Mary. One day, as I quietly drew while watching my grandmother's craft class as usual, a student who had gotten up for a break approached me from behind and peered at my drawing. Mary, you're really good at drawing. Hearing this, the other students gathered around and looked at my drawing, echoing similar cheers. With just a pencil, she can draw this accurately? She might be a genius. Especially the expressions on the faces and the lines of the clothes wrinkles are too realistic, almost at a professional level. At that moment, I was drawing my beloved grandmother. I thought the students were just exaggerating to be nice to my grandmother. I was simply transferring what I saw onto my sketchbook, nothing more. After the class ended and the students left, my grandmother looked closely at my drawing. Those people earlier were a bit exaggerated, weren't they? I laughed, but my grandmother looked at me seriously. Not at all. You might have a talent for drawing, Mary. I was skeptical, but then... Wow, Mary, that's amazing. I remembered being praised in school art classes by teachers and peers. I had thought they were just being kind to me because my family had abandoned me. Actually, I had no idea how much talent I had for drawing. Am I really that good? Yes, you are. Mary, you have a promising future. I know someone who runs an art class. Would you like to learn there? Yes, I'd love to. It was my grandmother who gave me a clear goal. 12 years had passed since then. Mary? It's really you. We're fans of your work. The expressions of the people, the warm use of colors, just looking at them makes us cry, said a woman much older than me, tears streaming down her face as she asked for a handshake. Thank you. I replied with a wry smile, shaking her hand and posing for photos with a smile. Thank you so much. We're looking forward to your future works, Mary. The gallery was bustling with people every day. I had succeeded as a contemporary realist painter. Mary, you have a TV appearance scheduled for this evening, so we need to start getting ready soon. Understood. But wait a moment. I stopped my manager and looked down. A little girl was desperately reaching out for a handshake. Thank you. Have you always been supporting me? The girl smiled but didn't speak. A woman, presumably her mother, hurried over and picked up the girl. I'm sorry. She's not good with talking to people. It's okay. Don't rush her. I used to struggle with writing myself. But with family around to kindly watch over, you'll eventually find something you love and shine someday. Thank you. The girl articulated her thoughts with effort, despite stumbling over her pronunciation. I'm the one who should be thanking you, I replied, squeezing the girl's hand again. Her mother hugged her child tightly and said, That was wonderful, wasn't it? With a beaming smile. Watching them, I felt confident that the child would be all right. It's time to go. Urged by my manager, I started to prepare to leave when the entrance to the hall became noisy.
Please wait! We can't let people without tickets in.
At the center of the commotion were a man and a woman in shabby clothes. The security guards were desperately trying to stop them, but they broke through and rushed towards me.
Let go. We're her family. We don't need entrance tickets, do we? That's right. You have no right to stop us.
Although their appearances had changed drastically over time, the moment I heard their voices, I felt a chill down my spine. The urge to flee overwhelmed me, but my legs were frozen, unable to move. The man and woman were indeed my father and mother.
It's Dad, you remember, right? Mary? I'm so happy to see you again.
As the security guards hesitated, knowing they were family, my parents approached me with composed steps. Though they should be in their 40s, they looked as if they were in their 50s or even 60s.
You've become so distinguished, Mary. When we saw your face on a huge billboard in New York, both your mother and I were shocked. To think our daughter would become so famous.
I always believed in you. I knew you would become someone important someday. I'm so glad I gave birth to you. Confronted by this elderly couple who spoke as if nothing had happened in the last 12 years, I was dumbfounded and couldn't find the words to respond immediately.
What's wrong? You've been silent.
Excuse me, but who are you, please? What are you talking about? You haven't forgotten, have you? It's Dad.
Surely you're just being shy. We appeared so suddenly, you must be surprised, right? Isn't that it?
How utterly self-centered can people be? What are you doing here now? I asked, deliberately avoiding eye contact.
What do you mean? Let's start living together again. We've come here for that.
I don't know these people. Please have them removed. I gave the order to the security guard in a flat tone, but the confused guard didn't know how to react.
To me, my only family is my grandmother.
I don't know these people.
You're not still holding a grudge about that time, are you?
That was our mistake. Sorry about that. My father apologized with a nonchalant attitude, not appearing remorseful.
Still holding on to the past like that, you're still a child. We're family, aren't we? It's natural for a family to live together. It's time you grew up and... Absolutely not.
I couldn't contain my anger.
The only person I can call family is Grandma. When you two left me to go abroad, only Grandma stood by me. I won't acknowledge you as my family now.
My mother bit her lip and glared at me. Yes, that look. The same cold gaze as if she were looking at something filthy. If you hate us that much, we'll give up on living together. Instead, could you give us one of your paintings? I was at a loss, unable to comprehend my father's inappropriate request. We're actually a bit short on money right now. I've heard that the paintings you draw are worth $1 million each. So, wouldn't it be all right to give us one of them? You have a proud son named Mike, don't you? Why don't you ask him for help? I'm not drawing for you guys. I will never give away my paintings.
Don't mention Mike. I don't even want to hear that guy's name.
Suddenly, my mother screamed almost like a wail. Why would you say that? He's your child, isn't he?
That guy is no son of ours. Just a nuisance.
Then, the two of them bitterly recounted what had become of Mike over these 12 years. After moving to Germany with the family, Mike quickly got admitted to a prestigious university thanks to his academic abilities.
That was all according to our expectations.
But soon after, Mike lost his motivation to study. He stopped attending university and started living a wild life, hanging out with bad company during the day. No matter what his parents said, he wouldn't listen, and eventually, he stopped coming home altogether. He even got into trouble with the police. The Mike they described was truly a lost cause. Yet, I felt sympathy for Mike. He must have been another victim tormented by these parents. A few days after my family left me for Germany, I found a notebook in Mike's room. It detailed how he was forced to study every day, wasn't allowed to play with friends, got pigeonholed into a life decided by our parents after accidentally scoring 100 on a test in first grade, and how he was envious of me for not being expected to study. Mike once told me he envied me when we were kids, but I finally understood after reading that notebook. My father whispered, so others wouldn't hear. Just between us, Mike is a lost cause. We tried to rehabilitate him by bringing him back home, but who knows what he's doing now. The police came asking about him recently. He seems to be hanging out with dangerous people too. Might even be involved with one of those scam groups that are all the rage now. It's only a matter of time before he gets arrested. So, if you feel sorry for us being troubled by such a foolish son, please, give us one of your paintings. It would save us. It's also your chance to do a filial duty, right? Saying this, my parents began to apologize deeply in front of me.
Enough already! You too!
Suddenly my grandmother, who was in a wheelchair, shouted.
I've been listening quietly, and now because Mike turned out bad, you want Mary to help? What a joke! You were the ones who abandoned that child. Mom? Why are you here? It's my precious granddaughter's exhibition. Coming here is only natural as family.
With that, my grandmother glared at my father and mother.
You two are no longer family or anything to us. Just strangers. Now, get out. Security, what are you waiting for?
Startled by my grandmother's shout, the security guards hurried into action.
Wait a minute. Then we have our own plan.
A plan? Let's hear this plan of yours.
Susan, you've kidnapped our daughter, haven't you?
Kidnapped? You were the ones who abandoned this child and went abroad. My grandmother was furious, but I instead offered a wry smile.
Calm down, Grandma. Getting all worked up will just raise your blood pressure again.
I tried to calm my uncontrollably emotional grandmother. Then, facing my parents who were smirking triumphantly, I have unfortunate news for you. Legally, Grandma and I are now mother and daughter. Therefore, she cannot be accused of kidnapping.
What nonsense are you talking about? There's no way that could be recognized without the consent of the real parents.
But it is recognized. I was adopted by Grandma when I was 18. Legally, adoption without the biological parents' consent is possible if the adoptee is over 18.
Don't be ridiculous. How could such a thing be allowed?
Despite their protests, my parents attempted to sit down in the gallery but were taken outside by police officers who had been called to the scene. Mary, are you okay? My grandmother asked, gently patting my back with her usual kind smile.
Don't worry about it, Grandma. I'm fine,
I replied with a broad smile. After being taken to the police station.
What a nerve to call yourself a parent!
My parents were reportedly harshly reprimanded by the officer in charge. A journalist friend let me in on that bit of information secretly. Later, I learned through the news that Mike had been arrested for fraud. The TV screen showed Mike being put into a police car, but he bore no resemblance to the prodigy he once was called. My parents ended up being responsible for a significant amount of compensation for the crimes Mike committed, and reporters crowded in front of their house daily.
Help us out! We're your real parents, aren't we?
He's right. Don't you remember that I gave birth to you? My parents kept showing up at my home and studio, saying such things. Considering the future, my grandmother and I decided to move to a high-security apartment where my parents couldn't easily reach us. I'm sorry for making an elderly person like me your responsibility.
Not at all. I'm very happy. After all, everything I am today is thanks to you, Grandma.
Recently, my grandmother began to fall ill frequently. I hugged her as tightly as I could.
I love you, Grandma.
Though she had become much smaller, she was as warm as ever.